All right, good morning. So I am here to talk about the reflection assignment number 2 for trauma-focused CBT. And for those, we were to read 3 articles and pick out what we feel comfortable with and what we don't. So the first part would be the trauma-informed practices with children, the establishing safety through self-regulation. So for this one, I really enjoyed reading it. I liked the stories. I thought they were very helpful in identifying different processes to use to work with children. Specifically for the expressive of self-regulating interventions, that would be something that I would feel comfortable starting and doing with children because it's music, art, dance, play, some things that they may be able to connect with a little bit more and to work and utilize, especially when they don't want to speak about the event or the occurrence that they've witnessed and or gone through, whatever sort of trauma it may be. So this one, I felt that it would be a good fit for me to try with a child in therapy. The second one that I would feel comfortable trying is the mindfulness as the self-regulation. And this talked about increasing relaxation and the reduction of stress, body awareness, and emotional awareness. Even though it may be challenging, I do think it's really important for anybody at any time, but specifically in this case for the trauma, is to identify what some of those feelings are and just be very mindful of how you are working through that in all elements. I think that would be something that I would feel comfortable implementing. And the one that I don't feel as comfortable with and would take some time for me to get used to would be the building resilience. The section that I pointed out was the school-based self-regulation study, just as an example and a pinpoint. But I think the building resilience is a little bit challenging to me, and I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. So I would want to look at that a little bit more thoroughly. I think just because it is, it's hard. It's something that you have to work towards in different ways, and different kids respond to it differently. And I don't remember what article, but one of them said the building resilience must be in the next one. It's just challenging in general. Some of it comes from what it was like beforehand, and I feel like that would be a hard thing to work with. The next article that we read was the resilience, specifically for support and post-traumatic growth. So here I was looking at the resilience characteristics. The optimism I thought was something that I would feel comfortable working with, and the social support. This just being in relation to the resilience characteristics. The one that I don't feel as comfortable with, and I guess kind of goes with the next article, is the facing the fears. I think out of reading all of these, this bringing the trauma back up is hard to me, and that would be something that I would have to work with. But for the resilience characteristics, those were the ones that I pointed out and that I would feel comfortable with. I really feel social support is very helpful, even though I did kind of hesitate because sometimes it's harder to find, and you still may have challenges with it, but I do feel that it is a very good component. The next part that I really liked and felt very comfortable with is the developmental characteristics and developmental guidelines for promoting resilience, and how it goes over exactly how you can use it for each of the different age groups and how they grow on top of each other. Specifically though, chronological age versus developmental age, and how to target with you working with that youth, because it's different and it can be very different, especially what they've gone through. But I really liked pointing this out, and a lot of these characteristics guidelines, I do feel comfortable implementing, and it was very helpful just because trauma can happen at any age, and being able to identify what may be a good starting point to work with that youth was helpful for me. The next one that I felt comfortable using was in relation to the heading that said, just post-traumatic growth on page 185. This one, more specifically, was the reframing. I really like the idea of reframing and looking at the situation a little bit differently and creating different meaning to it. You're never going to change the trauma. You're going to have to work with it regardless, but to be able to look at it in a different light, I think could be beneficial for anybody, but specifically youth. Here was the point where I found that the major difference between resilience and this was post-traumatic growth is the characteristics of the resilience that are viewed as being present at an early age and prior to the traumatic experience. I think that's where I struggle with building the resilience, is because, what was it like before the trauma, if there was a before the trauma. So the growing resilience is definitely going to be a challenge for me in time. I think maybe just reading a little bit more about it would be beneficial for me, because I just don't know how I feel about that. But this article was helpful in outlining different thoughts, ideas, uses, and functions in resilience overall. And it was surprising to hear that some of it is related to what happened beforehand. So the last article we read was on distress regulation and the effective regulating training. I really like this article. There was a lot of components in this article that I did feel comfortable using. The one that I didn't feel as comfortable with was the grounding. I know it was one of the first ones early in the article. It's a lack of comfort just because it's a new concept, I think. I do like it in terms of avoiding difficult thoughts and feelings. It goes into like verbalization or drawing, which I know I mentioned previously, was having the youth, engage in different activities to explain the trauma. Just with the grounding part, it just sounded a little bit harder to come around. The progressive relaxation I felt comfortable with. Visualization is the one I really wanted to focus on. Peaceful and pleasant scene in sufficient detail that the relaxation naturally flows. I really liked that. I think that can be really helpful and still be hard to work with, but to have something else to focus on, I think is another sense of calm, which is much needed at this time. Physical activity was the other one that I feel comfortable with. I think it helps. Physical activity in relation to relaxation is huge anyway. It has so many good positive effects on the body, and in turn helps with sleep and stress reduction and things like that. I think that anybody would benefit from that, especially in stressful and traumatic situations. The anger dance, I thought that was really cool. The example they used is to take a song and create your own lyrics and shout it out and dance and engage in all of those, and being able to release maybe some of that tension that is felt. The challenge one would be the trigger identification and intervention. I think that it's hard to identify triggers or to learn what they are, and not that that's something to steer away from, but just to be able to be more familiar with how to identify those. I understand that certain concepts like heart rate increasing and change in physiological, but connecting that with what you're emotionally experiencing, I think is hard to identify. But again, as always, it's still something absolutely wanting to learn more about to be able to utilize with youth or anybody else. So those were the articles that we read, and then the last section that we were to work on was the workbook. So in each article, identifying what worksheet to use. So for the first article, with the things that I picked out, the 2 things that I felt comfortable with, I would look at the cognitive coping page, which is connecting thoughts, feelings, and behaviors together. I think that worksheet would be beneficial. Supporting resilience for the post-traumatic stress. Here I did kind of point out too, the trauma narrative work page with the processing, and the second one being the reminders. Those I think would go well with that article or use. And the last one was the relaxation skills, individualized for the youth and the parent. And here it does put the emphasis, no, not emphasis, but involve the parent, which you may have and you may not have depending on the situation with the youth. But I still think that it would be beneficial to have that relaxation skills worksheet done in conjunction with one of these implementations within the therapy. I do think that there's a lot of the pages in the workbook that you could use in different areas. Those were just the ones that I picked out for the time being. The psychoeducation one I really wanted to use because I just feel it's such a big component, but I couldn't quite fit it into the articles that we read, as I felt with many of these. But then there were other ones that I think would be very helpful to use in many of the different situations. So that concludes my reflection assignment for number 2 in the video. So thanks.